No human can digest wheat down to the individual amino acids.
Introducing Dr. Tom O'Brien, author of The Autoimmune Fix and You Can Fix Your Brain. Often called the Sherlock Holmes of chronic disease, he is a leading voice in functional medicine and autoimmune diseases.
26% increased risk of miscarriages.
I'm Loveleen, host of Limitless with Loveleen podcast on YouTube and Spotify. In this episode, we explore autoimmune disease, the early symptoms to watch out for, and the everyday foods that could be silently attacking your body. Could someone listening right now have an autoimmune disease that they're not aware of? Hi, Dr. Tom. Thank you so much for joining with me and today's session. Now, to start off with, the first question that I want to ask you is, how does someone know that they may be getting ill years before they get an official diagnosis from a doctor?
Well, that's a great question to begin with. Well, if we understand that when we go to a doctor, we're wanting to know if we have a disease, that doctors are classically trained to identify disease, not dysfunction. So the standard blood tests that are done as part of a physical, the CBC and the chem screen, they're not looking for function. They're looking for disease. And if you're within pretty much the normal ranges, you don't have a disease. And they mistakenly report that as you're healthy. No, that's not the tests that you did. The tests that you did are looking for disease. So, and there's a big difference between dysfunction and disease. Nobody wakes up with diabetes or rheumatoid arthritis, that it's a progressive accumulation of tissue damage from dysfunction that's occurring over a long period of time while we feel fine. I feel fine. Well, you know what the word fine means is frickin' insecure, neurotic, and emotional. We're fine. You know, so if you see someone say, hey, how are you? Well, I'm fine. You have no idea how they're doing, you know, so, but that's a separate discussion. So how does one know if they have dysfunction? That's an excellent question, and there's two levels of answer. The first level of answer is when something's not working in your body the way it's supposed to, and you kind of brush it off, it's not a big deal. No. Something's not working right. And that imbalance will progress into more dysfunction. It has the potential to progress into more dysfunction, which eventually produces symptoms. And when those symptoms, they're I woke up, my back's a little sore, I get up and move around and it's fine. I'm fine. But wait, you're not supposed to wake up with your back sore, or you're not supposed to wake up feeling fatigued. You know, I was talking to a friend this morning. There's an old Waylon Jennings song, a country guy, country music guy. I'm sick and tired of waking up sick and tired, right? And so we brush this stuff off because we don't know what to do about it, and it doesn't stop us. We can power through and do what we want to do. So we don't pay attention to the subtle dysfunction. If you want your body to run like a Lamborghini, then you need to treat it like a Lamborghini. And some people will get a Lamborghini and they never take care of it. You know, they just don't. Well, it's going to start running like a less sophisticated car after a while. A year or 2 years down the road, you don't do tune-ups, you don't get adjustments, you don't change the oil every 5,000 miles or whatever it is. If you don't do the maintenance on a high-performance car, the performance of the car starts to diminish. That's very true with our bodies. It's the exact same thing. So, so the first answer is ignoring the little things, the subtle things. The second answer is there's a battery of tests that you can do that identify what's really my current status right now. And that's how it is for me. You know, I see one patient maybe every 2 weeks. I don't have time, you know, but I enjoy the interaction. I enjoy being the Sherlock Holmes to figure out what's going on. But normally patients don't get to me until they're really sick, right? But it's the same protocol. You do 5 tests first before I ever see you, and so that I've got a accurate representation of what's going on right now. And I want 5 years worth of records, medical records of what's been happening for you. How has this been progressing, whatever this is? Then we have a session together. So there are tests that you can do that'll identify what your current status is before you get to the point of the progression of dysfunction that eventually manifests as disease.
I see. And you mentioned that these are symptoms that start coming up and people often ignore them. Are there any specific symptoms that you would say that you should definitely not be ignoring these, or that start to emerge that people don't realize at the time could be a signal for the future?
Yeah, you really don't. You shouldn't have any symptoms of anything.
Okay.
The body is a beautiful, it's the most high performance machine that I've ever been exposed to. You know, and we're born into this world. Most of us are born into this world a perfect 10 in function. Now there's some concerns because young people are much more toxic than ever. And so babies developing in utero, their brains aren't developing to their potential by the time they're born. So there's all of that, and it's really important. But in general principles, we're born with the opportunity for ideal function. But you start throwing bad gas, bad petrol into a Lamborghini, it starts not running so well. It's the same with the human body. You know, you start putting this, what is manifested as healthy food, healthy baby formula, and blah, 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 but it's not. Then the body starts compensating because it's not getting the ideal fuel, which is breast milk from a healthy mom. You know, moms, young women don't know this, but if you've got antibodies to your thyroid, then baby gets those antibodies to the thyroid. So baby's thyroid may be compromised by the time they're born or shortly thereafter. IgG antibodies are antibodies that go through the bloodstream, through the placenta into baby, because the idea is that mom's immune system is priming baby for the world that baby's coming out into. So it's like, okay, baby, here's some antibodies to cats. We have cats at home. No need to freak out by their dander. So here's some antibodies to help your immune system stay calm. Or here's some antibodies to mold. We live in a forest and the leaves decay and there's mold spores in the air. Don't worry about it. Here's some antibodies to protect you. Mom is priming baby for the world that baby is coming out into. And what world is baby coming out into? Mom's world, right? So IgG antibodies are the only ones that can get through into the baby's bloodstream. So baby may come out not to its full potential because of mom's current health status where she feels fine, but has some kinds of mechanisms going on. And the most common one, of course, is thyroid. But there are many, many different manifestations that it could be. So the functional tests are tests that are not looking for disease. They'll identify disease, but they're looking for how well is your body functioning right now? So that is certainly possible to do. And more young people are getting wise to the idea of, you know, these standard tests from my doctor, they don't tell me anything, right? Okay, I don't have diabetes. So am I healthy? Well, I don't know, because I've not done any tests for health. I've done tests for disease. But doctors won't tell you that because they don't understand that, right? Okay, I'll pause there.
It's okay. No, I completely understand that. I think one thing that as a medical student as well, we're very much taught, how does the body function? If there is any damage to it, any disease, how do we correct that? And that is obviously in its own right extremely important as well. But I want to touch on the fact that you're known as the Sherlock Holmes of chronic disease. What does this title mean? What sorts of tests would you do instead to look at function and to correct dysfunction in a patient?
One of my first mentors was Dr. George Goodhart, the founder of applied kinesiology, that's muscle testing. And he was very famous. He was a chiropractor in Detroit, but the Pope would send his jet to Detroit to get Dr. Goodhart. He was that kind of a quiet world healer, if I can say it that way. And his teaching was just exceptional. I'm forever grateful that I had the opportunity to study with him extensively. And when he'd be on stage, it was at the Marriott Hotel at Detroit Metropolitan Airport. That's where he taught his courses. And the stage was about 1 foot or so off the ground, just a small step up. And they were wooden platforms on wheels that the hotel employees would wheel in, and then they'd lay them down and put them together and put a carpet on top of it. So it was a large stage with a podium on it, but they were wood. When you would see Dr. Goodhart lift his knee up in the air, you'd get ready because here it comes. And he would lift his right knee up and his right arm, and he'd go, "Why, doctor?" And his foot would slam the ground, and we'd all be like this. Why does the patient have what they have? And he would do that almost every weekend that he was teaching in the courses that I attended. It was critical to him that we understand that the primary question a doctor could ask of this patient's environment, this patient's body, is, why are you doing what you're doing? Where is it coming from? Yes, it's important that you have chest pain. And yes, it's important to check the function of the heart. And yes, it may be very valuable to have nitroglycerin to take if you have chest pain to reduce the pain. But why are the blood vessels of your heart constricting, causing that pain, and nitro relaxes those blood vessels? Why is that happening? You can't live on nitro. Well, tens of thousands of people do because they're suffering and they don't know anything else. But where is it coming from? Now just Google cardiomyopathy, which is an enlargement of the heart muscle, and it swells up and then until it can't quite function the way it's supposed to. So it's not pushing out as much blood, because the heart muscle is contracts, relax, contract, relax, which pushes out blood. And that's called your ejection fraction. So why is it that this patient's ejection fraction is so low? Well, the patient's got cardiomyopathy. Well, why is it that the patient has cardiomyopathy, which is the muscle of the heart is not functioning correctly? Why is that happening? Then just Google cardiomyopathy and gluten. Just Google it, and you'll see the studies from the American Journal of Cardiology, from Circulation, from first-tier journals, that sometimes a sensitivity to wheat won't manifest as problems in your gut. It'll manifest as cardiomyopathy sometimes. And that type of cardiomyopathy, they put the name on it, idiopathic cardiomyopathy. And all that means is they couldn't figure out why the patient's got cardiomyopathy. It's idiopathic. Well, what does that mean? It means I don't know why. That's all it means, right? I don't know why. But they put a name on it, so the general public goes, "Oh, okay." Because doctors aren't trained to ask, why is this happening? They're trained to go after the symptoms to help you feel better, which is very important to do. Why does a patient have high blood pressure? Why? Well, here's a prescription for blood pressure medication. You make sure to take your blood pressure. Okay, that's very important to do. But if you don't identify why, you're on high blood pressure medication the rest of your life. But if you can explore to find out why, then what I've said to every patient, and this has never failed, I mean, I think we're batting 100%, I believe so, over the years. I've been doing this for over 40 years, but we've been successful reducing high blood pressure, I believe, in every patient. But the guidance is always the same. Please go back to your cardiologist or your doctor that prescribed the medication and say, I'm working with a doctor who's talking about diet and exercise and what might be triggering some of these symptoms that I have. And he suggested that I come in and ask you, could you have the nurse monitor me on a regular basis? Because he tells me if my body starts functioning better, I won't need the same kind of dosages of the blood pressure medication, and I could get dizzy or I could pass out if I'm taking too much medication. So could you just monitor me as I'm changing my diet and exercising and taking some vitamins to make sure that the dosage that you suggest I should take, I'll take it, but can we make sure it's the proper dosage? And every cardiologist or every doctor should be very happy to do that because they're not being dismissed, they're not being overruled, they're being a part of a team in an area that they're not familiar with. And if the doctor says no, find a new doctor. Now, you want to be monitored by someone who can monitor you on the medication you're taking, but you want someone to be open to make sure the dosing is correct. And that's true with autoimmune diseases. That's true with any medication that you're on. We don't want you living on the medication the rest of your life. There are a few exceptions to that, but in general, we don't. The medications have their place, and thank God for them. But we want to be monitoring to help the body function better so it requires less medication because of the potential side effects of the medication.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I want to touch on something that you mentioned. You said autoimmune. Could someone listening right now have an autoimmune disease that they're not aware of? What does it mean to have an autoimmune disease?
Oh, that's a very good question. Yes. And my book, The Autoimmune Fix, won a National Book Award because, as rare for health books, but it's because it's really a good book and it explains where autoimmunity usually comes from. And what you learn in that book, and there's over 300 studies that are referenced there. What you learn is that people have a mechanism going on where their immune system is attacking their own tissue. That's what autoimmunity is. The immune system is attacking your thyroid, or it's attacking your brain, or it's attacking your joints. And that's Hashimoto's thyroid disease, or that's multiple sclerosis, or that's rheumatoid arthritis, or psoriasis if it's attacking your skin. But that attack is going on for years before you ever have a symptom. That the elevated antibodies that are attacking your tissue are there for a long time, killing off tissue, killing off tissue, killing off tissue. Before you've killed off enough tissue to where that tissue, that organ, can't function normally anymore. Now you start having symptoms. But when you're having symptoms, you're already 3, 5, 7, 20 years, depending on which autoimmune disease it is, you're already 3, 5, 7, 20 years down the road of an autoimmune mechanism going on that eventually will damage enough tissue that you don't function properly anymore with that tissue. And now you have symptoms, and now, congratulations, you have an autoimmune disease. But the mechanism is going on for years before that. There was a really excellent article that came out a few years ago. Professor Yehuda Schoenfeld from Tel Aviv University in Israel is the chairman of the Department of Immunology. And he has I don't know how many. My guess would be possibly a few hundred doctors, medical doctors, who have gone back and gotten their PhD in immunology from him. To really give you a sense of this guy, last count that I know of, 28 of his PhDs in immunology chaired departments of immunology in medical schools and hospitals around the world. They're his students. This is the Godfather. And he published a paper on gluten and autoimmune diseases. And he said, although wheat has a place in our food chain, it's not essential to the diet. There's nothing in there that's essential. You can replace any of the nutrients in wheat. So if you don't eat wheat, you're not going to develop a disease as long as you are replacing the protein and the vitamins and minerals that are enriched in the flour, making the bread and things. And they looked at, it narrowed down to, 83 studies, about gluten and autoimmune diseases. And what they discovered was that 79% of the patients got better on a gluten-free diet. And this was confirmed in 63% of the studies. So not every study, not every patient, not every time, but more than half the time, people got better on a gluten-free diet. And it didn't matter what the autoimmune disease was. And he listed about 25 or 30 autoimmune diseases, from cardiomyopathy to diabetes to multiple sclerosis to psoriasis to rheumatoid arthritis. The most common autoimmune disease that gets better on a gluten-free diet was Hashimoto's thyroid. It was 87%. The second most common one that got better on a gluten-free diet was psoriasis. It was 63%. 63% of all psoriasis patients get better on a gluten-free diet. And they're not celiac. So you don't have to say, well, you don't have celiac, then you don't have a problem with wheat. That's nonsense. That's a historic misconception. It's a nice way of saying they're wrong, right? But a sensitivity to wheat can manifest wherever the weak link is in your chain. So I tell you that because you just Google whatever disease you've got, just Google that disease and gluten. You're going to find some studies that say, sometimes it really helps to go on a gluten-free diet. So autoimmunity, the spectrum of autoimmunity, begins years before you ever have a symptom. So by the time you get the diagnosis, you're pretty far down the road of damage to the tissue.
Okay, I see. And what sorts of things might show up on a test if an individual could get a test of function, or to see how can they detect this earlier instead of just waiting for symptoms to manifest?
Good question. There are laboratories, specialty laboratories, that will look at your blood. Do you have antibodies to your own tissue? And they'll look at 20, 25, 30 different tissues. They'll have one blood test looks at 4 for the heart, 8 for the brain, the liver, the kidneys, the reproductive system, the muscles, the joints. And so you do a single blood test and you look to see, do I have any autoimmune mechanisms going on right now? And it's extremely rare to have someone come back negative. Extremely rare, because the world we live in today is so toxic. We're exposed to so many different components that activate an immune response. And there are 6 basic mechanisms behind the development of autoimmunity. The most common one is called molecular mimicry. So molecular mimicry, what it means, if you think of protein like a brick wall, that there's lots of bricks that make up a brick wall. And the brick layer use different colored bricks to make a wall. And they got some design like a bird or whatever it should be on the brick wall. So, well, that's pretty cool. those bricks of the brick wall are called amino acids. And the amino acids come together in a particular order to make muscle tissue, or to make liver tissue, or to make thyroid tissue. There's different amino acid structures. There's different bricks that are used. And so I refer to it as AABCD. That's just the different colors of the bricks. It's the different amino acids. So if you have a sensitivity to wheat, I'll use that one again because there's so many studies on this. There are hundreds of studies, literally. If you have a sensitivity to wheat, the immune system making the antibodies to fight wheat, they look for the brick structure. They look for the amino acid structure, and I'll call it AABCD. Okay? Now you have antibodies in your bloodstream that are going everywhere. Antibodies are like special forces. They've got high-powered laser rifles, and they're well-trained, and they're going after just AABCD, just gluten. That's what they're looking for. And your bloodstream is just a highway. You know, all the traffic's going in the same direction, but it's just a highway. When you do a blood test, you're asking how many trucks, how many Tories are on the road right now? What about cars? What about Lamborghinis or Maseratis? What about old junker cars that have smoke coming out the exhaust? Your bloodstream is just telling you what's on the highway, right? Which is great. You want to know. But the antibodies are looking for AABCD, and they're going and now there's no lanes of traffic in the bloodstream, so everything is bouncing into each other like bumper cars at the circus, right? That's your bloodstream. That's what's happening all the time. How do the antibodies attack only AABCD? How do they do that? That's the beauty of your immune system, is that they're special forces. They've been trained. They've got laser rifles, and they go boom right after AABCD. The problem is that brick structure, AABCD, is also a component of the brick wall of what makes up the collagen on your joints. So the soldiers are going after gluten in the bloodstream. Look over there, AABCD. And they fire their laser at AABCD because it's gluten. Well, it's not. It's actually the collagen of your joints, but it includes AABCD as part of the brick wall. But the soldiers aren't trained to differentiate that well. They're going after AABCD. So the mimicry, the molecular mimicry of the tissue of the joints looks like the AABCD of gluten. The molecular mimicry of myelin, which is the saran wrap around your nerves, includes AABCD. So the soldiers that are going after gluten in your blood, look over there, AABCD, and they fire their chemical bullet at myelin. That damages the myelin. Then your body has to make more antibodies to myelin to get rid of the damaged myelin cells. Well, you eat wheat every day. You keep making antibodies to wheat every day. And so the AABCD in your genetic makeup makes you vulnerable to those antibodies going after myelin. That's where MS comes from, is antibodies to myelin. Rheumatoid comes from antibodies to your collagen, to your joint surfaces. Psoriasis comes from antibodies to your skin. Hashimoto's thyroid comes from antibodies to your thyroid. That's where those diseases come from. But Schoenfeld told us in the article, over half the time, 62, 63% of the time, people get better on a gluten-free diet who have autoimmune diseases. Why? Because of molecular mimicry. So, well, what do I do? Well, you find out, are you making antibodies to wheat? Not, do you have celiac disease? That's important. And most doctors say, well, if you don't have celiac disease, you don't have a problem with wheat. That's utter nonsense. That's a historic misconception. If you have antibodies to wheat, it will manifest. It has the potential of manifesting wherever your weak link is in your chain. You know, you pull at a chain, it breaks at the weakest link. It's at one end, the middle, the other end, it's your heart, your brain, your liver, your kidneys. Wherever your weak link is, you pull on the chain, that's where it's going to break, okay? So how do you find out where the weak link is? That's determined by two things, your genetics and what are called antecedents, which is a fancy word that means how you live your life. You eat tuna fish 2-3 times a week, you likely have mercury toxicity because most of the tuna is high in mercury. That's an antecedent, right? You're in a terrible relationship, you feel threatened every day by your partner, you're producing stress hormones. That's an antecedent. And then your genetics will determine where that's going to manifest when you eat wheat or dairy or whatever vulnerabilities you have. So this whole concept is explained in great detail in my book, The Autoimmune Fix. Also in the docuseries we did, Betrayal, the autoimmune disease solution they're not telling you. And I interviewed over 80 world experts in that docuseries, including Schoenfeld and many others. And you listen to these experts explain this, and I'm asking the questions because I read their studies, so I knew what to ask them. And I'd help interpret it into everyday language from the geek that most of them talk. You know, everyday person doesn't understand geek so well. That's okay. We'll interpret it for you. You know, your blessing's just a highway. You know, and when you start thinking that way, you start to get a bigger picture and you're not scared to ask questions.
Definitely. No, I agree. And that's really interesting to hear. I actually want to dive deeper into a point that you mentioned about gluten. So what does it mean to have gluten sensitivity? How common is it? And how can someone work out if they have it?
Really good question. Gluten sensitivity is the most common food that people are sensitive to. And gluten sensitivity means your immune system is fighting wheat. Well, how do you know? You do a blood test to see. And if you have elevated antibodies to wheat, it's non-negotiable. Your immune system is the armed forces in your body, the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Marines. We call them IgG, IgA, IgE, IgM, cytokines. They're all different branches of the armed forces there to protect you. That's all the immune system is. Really, really important. And we now know with the science today, it is the primary contributor to aging. The Italians came up with this in 2008, the term inflammaging. So the more inflammation you have, the quicker you age. And inflammation is just an activated immune system trying to protect you. So the $1 million question comes back to Dr. George Goodhart. Why, doctor, is your immune system trying to protect you? Where is the inflammation coming from? And that's the pull on the chain. It's inflammation is the pull on the chain that's going to cause the break at the weak link, which is determined by your genetics and antecedents. So when you start to look at it this way, it's a very simplistic way of looking at it, but no one can argue with this. It just makes sense, right? I mean, it's much more detailed and much more sophisticated to that. But for the average person who is not getting a PhD, you just need to know, how am I pulling on the chain? What is my immune system trying to protect me from? And the most common food is wheat, by far the most common. And it's because, remember the brick wall, the amino acid structure, the brick wall, the problem with wheat is that no human can digest wheat down to the individual amino acids. We don't have the enzymes to do that. No human can do this. Just read the science, it's really clear. So if you think of protein like a pearl necklace, you think of this brick wall concept of protein that makes up your brain tissue, your liver, your muscles, your heart. It's all made of protein. And so if you think of protein like a brick wall for a visual, okay. Well, the bricks of the brick wall, the amino acids of the brick wall are a specific order. And the problem with gluten is that no human can break down the brick wall into the individual bricks. Professor Alessio Fasano at Harvard uses the analogy of a pearl necklace. If that's protein, a pearl necklace, same concept as if it's a brick wall. But now let's say, okay, think of a pearl necklace. The acid in your stomach undoes the clasp of the pearl necklace. Now you have a string of pearls, and your enzymes act as scissors to cut that pearl necklace. Snip, 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 smaller and smaller pieces until you're down to each pearl of the pearl necklace. That's called an amino acid. A, B, C, D. Those are the amino acids. Okay. The problem is humans don't have the enzymes to break down wheat all the way down to the pearls of the pearl necklace. The best we can do are clumps of the pearl necklace called peptides. And no human can break it down. No human. Let me say that differently. No human. So if you're human, this relates to you, whether you feel it or not when you eat the food. Well, I feel fine when I eat wheat. Doesn't matter how you feel, because the weak link in your chain are your joints. That's where rheumatoid comes from. And you don't feel it until you've damaged enough tissue, right? So you've got these peptides that come out of the stomach into the small intestine. Now you have sentries standing guard. I think of the soldiers at Buckingham Palace with those big hats, you know. They're just standing there, stiff as can be. They're dormant. Don't mess with those guys. You know, you don't want to mess with those guys. They're special forces. The sentry standing guard in the beginning of your small intestine and other places, but for this discussion, in the beginning of the small intestine are called toll-like receptors. And they're just standing there. They're watching everything that comes out of the stomach. Okay, why are they doing that? Why, doctor? Once again, if you go back to our ancestors before agriculture, so before 10,000 years ago, were nomads. They followed the herds for food. They were always moving around. They didn't have villages. They're always moving around. Okay? Their primary concern was finding food. So they're walking around, they're looking for food. Hey, what's this? The first thing they do is they sniff it. Next, they nibble at it. Then they would eat it. And if there were bad bugs on the food that they couldn't identify, the bad bugs are now part of that glob of food that's coming into your intestines. And the toll-like receptors are just sitting there watching everything that comes from the stomach. That's their job. When they see a bug coming out of the stomach into the intestine, because you absorb your nutrients in the intestines, anything that gets into the intestines can go anywhere in the body, right? So if they see a bug, two things happen within 5 minutes. First, they send a message to increase the production of something called zonulin. Zonulin is the protein that causes leaky gut. Why? Why would they do that? Because leaky gut opens up the cells a little bit in the walls of the gut, and then water from the body comes into the gut to wash out the bug with the poop. Leaky gut is not bad for you. It's a life-saving mechanism. Excessive leaky gut is bad for you. That's a whole nother discussion. But leaky gut is designed as a life-saving mechanism. Those humans that didn't have good zonulin production, toll-like receptors that were working really well to protect because of something bad came in from the food that they were eating, if they didn't have good toll-like receptor function, they died. They didn't reproduce. All of us here today carry the genes of our ancestors who had really good protection against bugs. That's why we're here. our ancestors survived and they reproduce. And those genes carried on generation, all the way to us. It's a beautiful thing when you think about it. Leaky gut's really cool. Saves your life. But excessive leaky gut is not. Causes a lot of diseases. So, the toll-like receptors are sitting there watching everything that comes through. Well, remember I talked about molecular mimicry. The peptides, the clumps of the pearl necklace of wheat that no human can break down further, and so they're in peptides. The peptides have a very similar structure, the brick wall, AABCD, a very similar structure to bad bugs. So the toll-like receptors, this is from Harvard, this is what they teach in gastroenterology at Harvard, is that the two most powerful triggers of toll-like receptor 4 in the proximal part of the small intestine are bad bugs and gluten, because gluten looks like a similar amino acid structure as a bug. That's why every human gets leaky gut when they eat wheat, without exception.
Okay.
You study this science, you go, oh my God, I need to read this again. Wait, what? Pizza? Wait, what? What? You know, I mean, it bums you out when you realize what the science is telling you. But it's true. It's very true. So you go for gluten-free pizza. And I'm from Chicago originally. You know, our pizza is really good in Chicago. But, you know, I don't do that anymore. Because I know I've read too many studies, literally hundreds of studies on the immune response to wheat because of molecular mimicry will go after your heart, or go after your brain, or it'll go after your thyroid, or it goes after your skin. It just depends on your genetics and antecedents as where it's going to manifest. So you listen to the world's best, Schoenfeld, the Godfather, talking about autoimmunity, and you read his paper on gluten and autoimmunity, you go, oh my God, wow. Well, that explains, Well, that explains, and then you start to see the bigger picture of where all this is coming from.
Do you think everyone should cut out gluten from their diets?
I never say that because I'd be branded as a fanatic. But I think everyone that has a health concern should be tested properly to see if your immune system is fighting wheat. If your immune system is fighting wheat, it's non-negotiable. It's a primary trigger of inflammation. And 14 of the 15 top causes of death are chronic inflammatory diseases. I mean, it's a no-brainer when you just line up the science. This causes this, causes this. Oh, wow. Oh, bummer. But I grew up on croissants. I love croissants. I grew up half Italian, and my grandparents used to make pasta from scratch. I grew up with the very best of pasta and ravioli and mostaccioli, and I've just all this wonderful, wonderful food. But you know, you just can't do it. You can't do it.
I have a question, which is, in our diets, it seems that gluten seems to feature heavily across cultures as well. Food seems to be featuring more wheat, more gluten. If from a very evolutionary point of view we look at, we can't actually digest this properly, how come it's become so prominent in our diets now? For many people, carbs is kind of the main source of fuel for them. What should they do instead then?
Really, really good question. There's a couple of questions there. In the early 1950s, there was a scientist. The problem with wheat used to be that wheat would grow 5-6 feet tall. That's 2-3 meters tall. And the top is where the seeds grow, the wheat berries that you get the flour from. And they'd be so heavy on top that the plant would fall over and you couldn't harvest it. Well, in the 1950s, one scientist came up with what was referred to as dwarf wheat and shorter plants, He won the Nobel Prize for this because millions of lives were saved, millions and millions of lives. Because now, if you grow dwarf wheat, you can harvest a great deal more tonnage per acre of wheat. Great. And those boats went to Africa for famines. Those boats full of wheat went to India, to the Southeast Asia, to feed starving people. Millions and millions of people lived because of that creation of dwarf wheat. No question about it. But its nutritive value is not that great. Keeps people alive, but as Schoenfeld said, it's not that great. And the inflammatory nature of it is so high that if you look at the studies, the incidence of autoimmune diseases, they're all going up 4 to 9% a year. That began somewhere in the late 50s. Why? Because more people were eating wheat, and they were eating much more wheat. Now Hashimoto's is going up, inflammatory bowel disease is going up, psoriasis is going up, rheumatoid is growing up. They're all increasing in frequency. And you see the graphs of increased wheat consumption per country per year and increased autoimmune diseases per country per year. And they're following each other. And you see that and you go, oh my gosh, could that be contributing to this? Well, I need to study that a little more. And you would see there is a direct correlation. And then you look at Schoenfeld's study as an example, and there are hundreds of studies like this. And Schoenfeld said 63% of the people get better with autoimmune disease on a gluten-free diet. So not every single one of them, but more than half on a gluten-free diet without celiac disease. You don't have to have celiac disease. So the test, because you'll ask about the test. The test to do, and I've been teaching this since 2008 all over the world. And every time I go to a conference, I go down to the vendor area and look at all the suppliers there for equipment for doctors and nutrition for doctors and all of the laboratory tests for doctors. And I look at all the labs and talk to them about how do you check for wheat sensitivity? And most of them look at gliadin, alpha gliadin, and they look at transglutaminase for celiac disease. And that's pretty much all they do. Maybe they include deamidated gliadins. Okay. But there's 62 different clumps of the pearl necklace from poorly digested wheat. Why are you only checking 2? And they just look at me. Well, I didn't know that. Oh, here, read this study. And but laboratories are there to produce what doctors will commonly use. So I mean, they're for profit. So they, they're not research oriented as much. But a laboratory came out a few years ago, and Mayo Clinic wrote, this technology is a new era in laboratory medicine. That was their exact language. And the way that I talk about that on stage is I'll say, if I had met you in 1990 and I told you, in 25, 30 years, I'm going to have this black thing in my hand the size of a wallet, and there's no buttons on here. But if I just run my finger across it, I can tell you in just 1 minute that the air particulate matter today in Chicago is 48. It's a good day to exercise outside. San Diego's 39. Really good day to exercise. But Malaya in Australia is 82. Do not ride your bicycle outside today. Now, I can tell you the air particulate matter anywhere in the world in 5 seconds. Because I've got the encyclopedia of the world in my hand. And if I had told you that in 1990, you would have thought I was watching too much Star Trek, right? That not possible. What are you talking about? That's well, maybe in 100 years. No, in 15, 20 years, technology improved so much. and it's improving now even faster and faster and faster. But the technology that most laboratories are using is from the 1980s and the 1990s, some of it from the 1970s, CBC and the chem screen, late 60s. And that's what they look at to see if you're healthy, is a technology from the 1960s. Well, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. No, it doesn't. So there's a new era in laboratory medicine, technology that's right on the money every single time. And you can do a finger prick test, put a drop of blood on a card, send it off to the lab, and it's the most accurate test for wheat sensitivity on the planet today. Now, sorry, I've not been to China, I've not been to Japan. I don't know about their laboratories' testing availability. But in the Western world, North America, South America, Latin America, Europe, Australia, I know those worlds of laboratory medicine. There's nothing that compares to this. So just a finger prick, it's called the wheat zoomer, because you zoom in on the problem. And your doctor won't order it for you because they don't know what this is. And they've never heard of this before. So if you want, you go to my website, thedr.com, and you can order it on my website. And it's now in Europe. It's North America, and they're building a new lab in Europe, but they've already started offering tests in the United Kingdom and many other countries in Europe. And so you do a finger prick test for the wheat zoomer, and if you want to be comprehensive, you also do a blood test for the autoimmune zoomer that looks at over 30 autoimmune mechanisms to see, are you on the path to a particular autoimmune disease? And you'll identify it years before you've killed off so much tissue. And we started doing that test 10 years ago for people who really smart people who want health parameters. And when we'd explain this, and they say, well, that makes sense. So am I vulnerable now? I said, I don't know. Most of us are. Most of us have autoimmune mechanisms going on right now because of the amount of gum that we're getting in oat milk. You're avoiding dairy and you're using oat milk in your coffee every morning. Well, there's gums in the oat milk. Are you sensitive to the gums? Because if you are, molecular mimicry, it can affect your joints or your muscles. And so, well, I don't know. Well, that's why you do the test, to find out. And rarely do we get one that comes back negative. Very rare. Most everyone has autoimmune mechanisms going on that may or may not develop into an autoimmune disease. But when you ask the question, why is this happening? And you start dialing it down and you eliminate those triggers, your whole body starts functioning better. Your blood sugar stability is great. You start shedding pounds of fat off your body without counting calories. Your vitality goes up, your sleep is better, so you regenerate better because you only heal and regenerate when you're sleeping in parasympathetic dominance. So all of those things come about when you stop throwing petrol on the fire.
Okay, so let's say someone feels fine, but they want to start making these small changes. Let's say they've done the test, they maybe found out, okay, I do have gluten sensitivity, or I already have the antibodies for a certain autoimmune disease. What kind of changes would you tell them to start making right now so that they don't end up being diagnosed with an autoimmune disease?
Explore, why is this happening? Not just, hey, this is happening, which is great information to worry you, or to kind of kick you in the butt to say, oh, wait, what's going on here? And motivate you. But you have to explore, where is this coming from? Is it accumulation of heavy metals? Is it accumulation of glyphosate? Let me give you an example. At a French fertility center, they did blood tests on all the men to see, did they have glyphosate levels in their blood? And 87% of the men had glyphosate levels measurable in their blood. Glyphosate is a chemical put on fruits and vegetables. So if they had glyphosate levels measurable in their blood, they were 4-fold higher. That's 300%, not 10%, not 20%, not 50%, 100% higher glyphosate levels in their semen. If they had glyphosate levels in their semen, because they checked the semen, if they had glyphosate levels in the semen and that father's sperm was successful at the infertility center in impregnating an egg, there was an 18% increased risk of failed implantation with men who had glyphosate levels measurable in their blood. 18% failed implantation. As you know, your friends that are doing that service, spending tens of thousands of pounds or dollars to try to have a family. It's a beautiful thing, but insurance doesn't pay for this, so they're spending a tremendous amount of money. And not only 18% less likelihood of successful implantation, but 26% increased risk of miscarriages. 26% because dad had glyphosate in his blood. Yeah, wow, wow. And no fertility centers are checking this. They don't check this. So you have to figure out, why am I inflamed? Why do I have molecular mimicry attacking my thyroid and I have elevated thyroid antibodies? So first you have to see, do I have elevated autoimmune antibodies? Doesn't matter which tissue it is. That's your genetic vulnerability where it manifests, but the mechanism is the same across the board. And when you see you have the autoimmune mechanism going on, then you ask, why is this happening? And then you explore oxidative stress, you look for heavy metals, you look for mold, you look for petrochemicals, you look for insecticides and pesticides that have accumulated in the blood. You have to look at all this stuff to find out, why is this happening? And when you find out it's happening, then you zero in on that problem. How do you get lead out of your body? Or how do you get mercury out of your body? How do you get glyphosate out of your body? How do I stop the exposure to glyphosate? There's a tremendous amount to learn, and it's overwhelming for people. I know you'd like to have an answer for your listeners right now of what they can do. And this is the answer. My book, You Can Fix Your Brain, was #1 in 7 categories on Amazon for brain function: seizures, Alzheimer's, migraines, #1 in 7 different categories. Really good book. I argued with Rodale Press for 2 weeks on the title. They didn't like the title. I said, I don't care. That's the title. It's my book. I wrote this book, and the message is, you can fix your brain. So the agreement I made with them was for the subtitle. And the subtitle is The Secret to Success. The subtitle is just 1 hour a week to the best memory, productivity, and sleep you've ever had. And that's how you get successful, because everything I'm telling you here is so overwhelming for a person to hear. They're immobilized. They don't know what to do. This is what you do. You allocate, you know what, family, every Tuesday night after dinner, don't bother me for an hour. I'm going to learn a little more of how we can be healthier. Or every Saturday afternoon for an hour, don't bother me. I'm learning a little more of how we can be healthier. You allocate 1 hour a week, because when you learn that storing your leftover food in plastic containers in the refrigerator, the phthalates, the chemicals used to mold plastic, are in your food the next day. You eat the chicken and you get phthalates that accumulate in your body. When you learn that, then you go back to the book and you look at the 3 URLs for glass storage containers: mileskimball.com, Amazon, and whatever the third one was. And you open up the website, you say, oh, those are okay. And you go, oh, I like those. And you order 3 round ones and 2 square ones and 1 for the pie. And you pay with your credit card, hit send. It took an hour. You're done for the week. But never again will you poison your family with minute amounts of toxins that can accumulate in your body. Never again will that happen. And then next week, when you've learned that nail polish, the phthalates in nail polish are in your bloodstream in 4 to 5 minutes. It's what makes the polish hard. They're in your bloodstream in 4 to 5 minutes. And so you go to the URL for organic nail polish and you order organic nail polish. And then next week, when you learn that houseplants filter 74% of the toxins in indoor air pollution out of the air. Wait, what? And then you download the handout. Just go to my website, thedr.com/plant, and download the handouts from NASA on houseplants. And they absorb the toxins in the air because our astronauts were going loopy in space from all the plastic in the air that they were breathing, because everything up there is made of plastic inside, right? And then next week, and every week you spend 1 hour, and in 6 months, you've completely changed your metabolism. You've altered your dynamics in the direction of much better health. You see a friend at church that you haven't seen in what happened to you? My God, you look so great. Were you on a diet? Well, no, but I'll tell you what, I've lost 18 kilograms in the last 6 months without counting calories because I found out I was wheat sensitive and dairy sensitive. I got those out of my diet. I got organic nail polish. I've got glass storage containers. We have houseplants in every room. And your friends just go, and they're overwhelmed because it's so much. The key to success is 1 hour a week. First, you do the tests to find out what your current status is. Then, and you want it fixed right now, but you can't do that. It's not going to happen. It's going to take 6 months, a year, 2 years, depending. I have a patient right now. She's had 3 miscarriages from fertility centers. And so we ran the tests and she's sky high in mold in her body, sky high, just way off the charts. I said, please don't try to get pregnant right now. And she looked at me. I said, you've had 3 miscarriages and no one's been able to figure out why. The amount of inflammation in your body, and it's called endometritis, when it's inflammation inside the uterus, is preventing you, most likely is preventing you from having a successful pregnancy. Let's clean up your body. This will take at least a year to a year and a half, and then go for it. So please talk to your husband and see if you guys can agree to take some preventive measures, whatever you can do. But your body is not willing right now. It's way too inflamed. And they got it. And I just did a follow-up visit with her 4 months since she began. She's lost a bunch of weight. Her energy's up. She's sleeping soundly through the night. All these little symptoms she had before are gone. Can I get pregnant? Can I get pregnant? No, not until the antibodies are down to normal range, because the antibodies are pulling on the chain, causing more inflammation. So we have to get the inflammation down so you have a safe nest inside of you. But I think you're going to be fine, but just be patient, right? That was just yesterday. And she had been to many doctors and, had spent lots and lots of money. But she's so grateful, almost crying on the phone, just so grateful because she understands the mechanism and she has to have patience. Well, how can I accelerate this? Because she's your age and it's like, I want it now. I want it now. I want it now. Right. And so she's like, what can I do? I said, you're doing great. Just be patient. Here's a couple things that we can move along a little faster, perhaps, but just be patient. You're doing fine. This is going to be great. And so that's the key with every single degenerative disease. Now, look, you have worms, parasites making you really sick. You need medication, right? You take the medication. But if you have autoimmune diseases, you need this approach. You need this approach. So watch Betrayal. It's on my website, thedr.com. Watch Betrayal. It's free to watch it. And you start to understand the mechanism of where these autoimmune diseases come from and the path of what it's going to take to, and the language of the authors is arrest and reverse the development of autoimmune diseases.
So is it fair to say that autoimmune diseases, in the case of most people in terms of their health, what's happened is that they've had accumulation of some sort of toxin or pressure in their external environment over time in their body? So in order to reverse that, again, you have to accumulate these small kind of wins, such as adding plants into your house, changing the types of containers you're using, and these small wins end up accumulating. And that's where the reversal occurs then, to actually creating a lifestyle change rather than just a diet.
That's exactly right. You've got the big picture. That's a very good summary. It's, we talked about it back in the 1980s. The term was epigenetics, which means what happens around your cells, around your genes, that most of us are born as a 10. There was a movie back in the day called 10, being perfect, beautiful people. Most of us are born a 10 to be a beautiful human. Most of us are, the vast majority of people. But because of the epigenetics, every cell in your body reproduces. The way it reproduces is that it reads the library, your DNA, of what it's supposed to do, but the DNA gets damaged over time. So instead of reproducing another 10 cell, you reproduce a 9.8. Okay, it's pretty close to perfect. That 9.8 reproduces as a 9.7 because you're eating gluten if you have a gluten sensitivity, then a 9.6, and then a 7.2, and then a 7.1, and then a 5.8. Now you have symptoms. That may have taken 15 years to get to this point, but now you have symptoms. So at 5.8, when the cell reproduces, it reproduces as a 5.7 if your lifestyle continues. But when you change the lifestyle, you change the environment, that 5.8 reproduces as a 5.9. And the 5.9 is a 6.0 and a 6.1. That's why it takes a year to 2 years to turn this around. You're changing the environment that the new cell growth, every cell in your body reproduces, some very fast, some slow, but every cell. Well, how's that happen? This is how it happens. You change the internal environment, you reproduce a healthier cell. When you reduce the inflammation in the body, you reproduce a healthier cell. When you sleep better, have more restful sleep, because you only heal in your sleep, you only reproduce in your sleep. When you're in a parasympathetic dominant state, you reproduce a healthier cell. So it's step by step by step. But the first step comes back to Dr. George Goodhart. Why, doctor? Why is this happening? It would shock us every time he would do it, right? But he really drilled it into us so that we understood. This is the mechanism of reversing disease, is that there's no pill that's going to do that, ever. You have to change the environment that the cells are reproducing in. And to change the environment that the cells are reproducing in, you have to identify what environment do you currently have, right? Got glyphosate, got mold, got heavy metals, got toxic chemicals, excessive stress hormones because of a toxic relationship. What do you have right now? That's where you start.
I want to go back to an earlier point you mentioned about leaky gut. What is a leaky gut and how can you reverse that?
Mrs. Patient, your digestive system is a tube. Starts at the mouth, goes to the other end. About 25 feet long, winds around in the center there. The inside of the tube is lined with cheesecloth. Now, what's cheesecloth in the UK? What do you call that? Poplin, is that right? Your grandmother would pour gravy into this cloth and the liquid comes through, but the clumps stay here.
Oh, a muslin cloth.
There you go. Okay. In the US, we call it cheesecloth.
Yeah.
Because you would pour the milk curd in there and you squeeze it and the milk comes out, and then you've got this cheese, I guess. So, but the inside lining of your intestines have cheesecloth, muslin cloth. Okay. Digestion cuts away at the pearl necklace. And so when you take a bite of a hamburger, you chew a few times and swallow, that ground beef, that meat, that mince meat, can't get through the cheesecloth into the bloodstream. If it did, it would kill you. You can't have beef molecule, big clumps of beef in your bloodstream, or many other food. You can't. It's got to be snipped down smaller and smaller and smaller of the pearl necklace until each pearl of the pearl necklace goes right through the muslin, right through the cheesecloth into the bloodstream. Now it's on the highway, and now it's a building block to make new cells, right? That's digestion and absorption. But when you have tears in the cheesecloth, tears in the muslin, now larger molecules of that ground beef get into the bloodstream. They're called macromolecules. They get into the bloodstream before they've been snipped down small enough. That macromolecule is now on the highway in the bloodstream, and your immune system, trying to protect you, says, what is that? That's not something that I can make new bone cells or brain cells or muscles. I better fight that, whatever that thing is. Now you make antibodies to beef or tomatoes or cucumbers or broccoli or chicken. It doesn't matter what the food is. If the macromolecule got through the tears in the cheesecloth into the bloodstream, now you've got now you have a mechanism creating antibodies to fight foods, right? And that's a person that does a 90 food blood test panel, and it comes back they're sensitive to 25 different foods. And they say, oh my God, that's everything I eat. Well, of course it is. Your immune system's just trying to protect you from the macromolecules that are getting in. Heal the gut, recheck in 6 months, now you're sensitive to 2 foods, maybe 3. That's leaky gut.
So how do you fix a leaky gut?
Oh, you really want quick one-word answers. There is no quick fix to a leaky gut. A leaky gut develops over many, many years, and you have to test the gut to see what's the problem in the gut. Are there parasites? Are there pathogenic bacteria? How much inflammation's in there? What's the balance of good guys and bad guys in the gut? And you have to recreate the environment of the gut, because your microbiome, the balance of good guys and bad guys in the gut, is so critically important to our function. That's a whole nother discussion. But the microbiome is so critically important to body function, critically important, and most everyone has an imbalance in the diversity of the good guys that are supposed to be there and the number of bad guys they have. Most everyone nowadays, because we grew up on, well, in my generation, it was Coca-Cola and Three Musketeers, but every generation is doing too much soda pop and too many different kinds of candies. And now the chemicals that are in most of the foods are something called microbial transglutaminase. It's really a nasty that very few people know about. I mean, there's all these different chemicals that we're ingesting, and some of my friends are calling them frankenfoods because they're genetically modified broccoli, they're genetically modified tomatoes. But rebuilding a healthy gut microbiome is critically important with every autoimmune mechanism, because it's the leaky gut that is the gateway in the development of autoimmune diseases. It's the gateway.
So let's say someone has found that they have these tears, that they're starting to get a leaky gut, and they want to change this with the foods they're having. Maybe they want to rebuild their gut microbiome. You mentioned gut microbiome, how important it is. Let's say someone wants to rebuild that now. They've given themselves 2 years to say, I'm going to completely change my life around. What kind of food should they start taking? We hear terms like prebiotic and postbiotic a lot. What is the difference between the two? Does someone need to take that?
Yes, they do. Prebiotics are the foods that feed the good bacteria in the gut. And so every one of my patients has at least one root vegetable every day. And I want them to alternate the root vegetables, radish, any tubers, sweet potatoes, turnips, parsnips, Jerusalem artichoke. They're all prebiotics. One of the very best is Himalayan tartary buckwheat. So using that flour of Himalayan tartary buckwheat for your baked goods, we make. I have a 5-year-old boy, and his banana pancakes are with Himalayan tartary buckwheat. But there's a whole world of prebiotics to take that encourage more development of the good bacteria. Then the probiotics are the good bacteria. And there's a lot of debate about, there's many studies that show benefit to taking probiotics, but not as much scientific evidence as to how it works, because the acid in your stomach destroys the probiotics. So what you're taking can't get to the large intestine. The acid in your stomach kills it. But it's the DNA of what's been killed that gets into the bacteria that's already in the gut. It's called horizontal gene transfer, and it goes into the bacteria that's there and reproduces as the good bacteria. So it's beneficial to take the probiotics, but there are types of probiotics that are more impactful, and they're called spores. The spores are not damaged by hydrochloric acid, so you take spore probiotics. They're on my website and all of that. And you inoculate with the spore probiotics, and you rebuild more of the beneficial bacteria that way. And it shows that it can reverse leaky gut or reduce the symptoms of leaky gut. And then also my patients, I want them to have 5 different forms of fermented vegetables in their refrigerator. Kimchi, miso, sauerkraut, fermented beets, whatever they want. And every day they have up to a tablespoon. And you can have like 1/3 of a tablespoon 3 times a day. You don't have to do it all at once. But you're inoculating with the good bacteria. You're taking the spores to create more beneficial keystone bacteria, the really good guys. And you're taking the foods to feed the good guys. So all of that will help.
I see. That's really interesting to hear, actually, because I've always wondered if our stomach acid, because it has such a low pH, it's so strong, how are bacteria actually getting through? So it's actually the DNA which is able to pass through, and then it regenerates.
Correct. It regenerates in the bacteria that's already in your gut. HGT, horizontal gene transfer.
That makes so much sense. And I want to ask you, what is the biggest myth about gut health that you hear, or something that you want people to realize about gut health?
Oh, Hippocrates said it thousands of years ago. And this is what they're teaching at Harvard Medical School. All disease begins in the gut. All disease, all chronic disease begins in the gut. It's the leaky gut that is critically important to address in every autoimmune disease. So you do the gut zoomer, like the wheat zoomer, you do the gut zoomer. So, all right, this is your current status right now. This will fix in a couple of months. This one will take a while. This might take 6 months to a year before we retest it. But if you don't know where you are and you're blindly taking probiotics, expecting them to work, you might get some benefit, you might not.
Okay. And what role does fiber play in the gut?
Oh, critical, really critical. It's the category of prebiotic, that fiber, your good bacteria feed on the fiber that you eat for food. So fiber is critically important. It also is just a glob that stimulates peristalsis to move things along. And there are many benefits to fiber. A primary one, though, is it feeds the beneficial bacteria.
I see. So I always hear the term insoluble versus soluble fiber. What is the difference between the two? What kind of things should someone incorporate into their diet then?
Well, the root vegetables for the insoluble is the easiest way to do that. That they're not broken down very easily and they get all the way to the large intestine.
I see. And I want to ask, you touch upon genetics a lot, but also lifestyle factors. What is this interplay between the two? What do you think ends up having maybe a bigger impact on whether or not we get sick?
Oh, it's lifestyle, by far, by far. Over 70% of the diseases that people get are modifiable. Certain things, like if you have the gene for cystic fibrosis, unfortunately, there's not much that has come about that can help that. There may be some fringe things that help at times I'm not familiar with. But over 70% of the diseases we get are modifiable. It's the environment that activates all of that.
And what does your own daily routine look like? What does your own lifestyle look like? What sort of things do you do to help modify all of those lifestyle risk factors?
We start our day. Most everyone wakes up, the first thing they do is go to the bathroom. After that, my patients, big glass of water with a scoop of Vitality C, that's 4,000 milligrams of vitamin C in it, and a scoop of Pectosol, which is an excellent citrus pectin that is an anti-inflammatory, a natural anti-inflammatory. That's how we start our day. Our coffee, I'm in charge of the coffee, and we use a coffee that is single estate, hand-picked, organic, that's coated with ashwagandha, medium chain triglycerides, and a couple of other things. It's called Zen Blend. So it's funny, we lived in Costa Rica for 4 years. Now we live in Italy, and I ordered my coffee from Reno, Nevada. That's where my friend lives, who has the company called Brain Bean Nutrition. It's the best coffee in the world. And so we start our day that way. So we've already got 4,000 milligrams of vitamin C. We've got a natural anti-inflammatory, a little botanical ashwagandha, medium chain triglycerides in our coffee. And then I put a scoop of collagen in our coffee. So we've already got the collagen, which is designed. There are 5 different types of collagen. The one that we use focuses on skin, muscle, and brain tissue. So all of that is by the time we're done with our morning coffee before breakfast. You just start learning all this stuff, little bits and pieces at a time, 1 hour a week. And in a couple of years, your friends will be blown away by all the things that you do.
I noticed you mentioned a couple of supplements there. Supplements seem to be a big thing. They're a very big hype, but which ones are actually worth your time? Which ones do you think patients should actually be taking, or even the average person, that are actually important for their health? And which ones do you think have kind of been overhyped in the media?
Anything on my website is first class. There's not much on our site, but only the things that I really believe in. And for example, when I fly across the Atlantic 14 times last year. I just came back yesterday from another trip, another talk. You get up and walk around a little in the plane. It's 8-10 hour flight. Talk to the flight attendants for a while, and I explained to them how dangerous their job is. That we're in this aluminum container called an airplane. And if you fly from New York to LA, solar flares, if you ever watch a National Geographic special, the solar flares are like atomic bombs on the sun. And the radiation from those atomic bombs travels 93 million miles and it hits Earth. The solar flares occur in 11-year cycles. And at the peak of an 11-year cycle, you fly from New York to LA, you get the radiation exposure in the airplane of 7 chest x-rays every time you fly. And at the low end of that 11-year cycle, it's 2 to 3 chest x-rays every time you fly. And the flight attendants go, and so, I heard something about that, but no one ever told us that. I said, just look it up, look it up. And then I explain what oxidative stress is. It takes 986,000 mousetraps to fill up a football field laid side by side. And my friend and the founder of functional medicine, Dr. Jeff Bland, figured this out. He measured a mousetrap, the size of a mousetrap, then he measured a football field, 986,000. If you cock each mousetrap and put a ping pong ball on each mousetrap, then you look out on the football field, it looks like snow. There's 986,000 cocked mousetraps with ping pong balls on them out on this big field. It looks like snow. Walk along the sideline with one tiny little ping pong ball. Throw that ping pong ball out onto the field. Pop, it hits a mousetrap. Now there's 2 ping pong balls in the air. Pop, pop. The one you threw out there and the one that was on the mousetrap that just popped. They hit 2 mousetraps. Pop, 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 pop. Now there's 4 in the air. Pop, 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 16, 64. And you have what's called a cascade reaction. The thing has a life of its own. Pop, 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 pop. That's oxidative stress. That's what happens when we have chemical trauma or radiation trauma. When we eat something that activates an immune response is going on in our bodies. What it looks like, an electron goes around a neutron, and if an electron gets knocked out of orbit, it's bouncing around inside the atom, just bouncing around in there. That's called a free radical. Pop, 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 pop. And when it hits DNA, it can damage the DNA. So, and once again, the DNA is the blueprint in a cell. So when that cell's reproducing, it reads the blueprint, but it's a damaged blueprint. You reproduce a mutagenic cell, a mutant cell. That's where cancer comes from. Pop, 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 pop. Mutagenic cells, and they progress and progress and progress. So every time you fly, Mrs. Flight Attendant, you're creating so much more free radicals that age you prematurely. Well, what do I do? What do I do? You take the antioxidants, the vitamins and minerals that act like sponges to absorb the free radicals. Pop, 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 pop. For you, because your job is a high exposure, high risk job, my recommendation is that you have expensive urine, that you take much more nutrient than your body normally needs, so that you can have the sponges to absorb these free radicals that are in your system at such a high degree. Well, how do I do that? Well, there's like 20 different things that act as sponges. So I actually put this together quite a while ago. They're called the gluten sensitivity packs. It's 1 pack with 6 pills in it, but 24 nutrients. Mrs. Patient, can you take 1 pack a day? It's 1 pack, 6 pills. Yeah, I can take 1 pack, but if you give them 6 bottles, they're not going to open 6 bottles every day. But you give them 1 pack a day, they'll take it. And so for you, Mrs. Flight Attendant, you take 2 packs a day. You take 1 before a flight and 1 after a flight. 2 packs a day. And then you do it 3 days before and 3 days after you fly. Well, but I fly 4 days a week. That means you're on it all the time, right? Because you're just absorbing this damage, these dangerous molecules that are damaging your DNA and aging you prematurely. So in terms of vitamins and minerals, for most people, the first thing to do is figure out what's going on. How are you throwing petrol on the fire? That's critically important. And while you're doing that, take 1 pack a day of a gluten sensitivity pack, and you're getting all the basics that you need. Maybe a little more than you actually need, but very safe, no complications whatsoever. I'd much rather you be at the high end of abundance in your nutrients as opposed to the low end. Well, you're okay. Because our lives are so stressful, our lives are so demanding of our bodies, I'd much rather you have more than you need than not having enough.
I see. And for my final question, I want to ask you, what is one piece of advice that you wish you could give to your younger self?
To myself? 1 hour a week. 1 hour a week. Whatever it is I want to learn, that if I hold that principle, the anxiety is not there. I have to know it now. I have to learn all this. 1 hour a week. And over time, accumulatively, you've completely changed the dynamic of whatever the topic is that you're addressing.
Thank you so much. It's been so great to have you on. We've learned so much, and I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me. Thank you.
You're welcome.